Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Strongest Steel podcast. This is episode 16 and our first podcast of 2025. So happy New Year to everybody and welcome. I'll just start by acknowledging that we are here in the District 3 office, in particularly in Brett's office, but more importantly on the traditional and stolen lands of Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And I'm Scott Lunny. I am the director for District 3. And today in the Strongest Steel podcast, I'm joined by the Wood Council Chair, Jeff Bromley, and the president of Local 1-417, Phil Ducharme. And we're going to talk a little bit about the forest sector and our Wood Council and what has been going on and what will be going on, and the good and probably too much of the bad about the forest sector, and a little bit about what's next for the industry and for our members in the forest sector. Just so folks know, historically, the IWA, which was the Woodworkers Union, was at one point the International Woodworkers of America, founded in 1937 in Portland, Oregon, became the Industrial Wood and Allied Workers of Canada, and in 2004 merged with the United Steelworkers of America. And since 2004, 2005, there's been what was initially called the IWA Council and is now called the Wood Council, which incorporated the former IWA locals, but also, in more recently trying to incorporate some of our other members in some other districts that are in Canada, at least, that are in the wood industry. And I know there's hopefully some effort to do some work with our siblings and sisters and brothers in the U.S. who are in the wood sector, because there are some of our employers who have mills in the southern U.S. in particular, and some non-union mills in other parts of the United States that are in the U.S. and in different districts in the U.S. So, with that, I will just maybe turn it over to Jeff and then Phil to each introduce themselves and just maybe tell us about your history in the sector and in the union.
Thanks, Scott. Like Scott said, my name's Jeff Bromley. I'm the Wood Council Chair. Still about 11 local, or there's 11 locals throughout the Wood Council. And they are the remnants of the former IWA. Myself, I come out of an operation, Canford Sawmill in Elko, British Columbia, southeastern portion of BC. And I celebrated my 30th year in July. So we're just over into just about my 31st year by now, is into the new year.
Is your mill still there?
So, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And it's still Canfor.
Yeah. And
that's one of the last standing Canfor mills.
Still on the seniority list, too.
Oh, really?
So,
I bet they're excited to have you back if you're going to come back now.
Yeah, I don't know. Nobody seems to run for the job, so maybe they don't want it. Yeah. But nonetheless, yeah. So I've done 18 years in the sawmill, and then I came out in 2012, worked for the local 1-405 out of the Kootenays in Cranbrook. And then in 2018, I was elected into this position, and I have been subsequently reelected twice now. Most recently in Winnipeg, actually, just prior to the District 3 conference.
Cool. Excellent. Congratulations.
I'm Phil Ducharme out of the Kamloops, president just recently since about September. Before that, I was I was an officer of the hall for 8 years, worked my way up from conductor to first vice president. I spent a little bit of time as a casual D3, and I came out of Toko Heffley Creek in Kamloops. This January would be my 21st year there. So I've been out of the mill for about 3 years now, doing the union stuff.
Cool. It's great. And so you guys have both been in the sector, in the industry for a long time. So, it's a bit of cyclical ups and downs. I don't know. Tell us about the ups and downs. I know we're in a bit of a low market time and a lot of layoffs right now, but not that many years ago, there was, I think, the highest lumber prices I've ever seen. So,
Right. And I mean, you're referring to the cycle in 2021 when we, those lumber prices between 2021 and then a year later in early 22, they cycled above 1,600 at one point per thousand board feet and then hovered around 1,100 in 2022. And I really think that had more to do with really to the pandemic and then the restriction of the supply chains in terms of the demand was still there and the demand grew. There was lots of renovation and restoration, as they call it in the business, R&R, and the demand was there on top of the natural demand for home building and house building, so largely in the U.S., but also in Canada. And so all those factors really combined to give it a bit of a false market. But saying that, even today, we're in around a $600 per 1,000 board feet on random links. For higher end stuff, you're going to get more. And if anybody had told you 20 years ago that in a $600 average market per 1,000 board feet that we'd be still suffering layoffs or downtime because the industry can't make a good dollar, anybody tell you were crazy. Yeah, I mean, back in the housing crunch and the Great Recession back in 08 to 09, they were looking at lumber prices of $180 for. Mm-hmm. And we were running for the most part. I mean, there was certainly cyclical downtime, but we were running.
So why is that? Just higher cost of fiber?
Yeah, there's no question that the higher cost. I mean, we do a pretty good job, or we like to think we do a good job of our collective agreements and what our folks make in the operations. Although I'm sure they would tell us that we could always do better. But nonetheless, the biggest cost to producing lumber is getting it out of the bush in terms of permitting, trucking, and the stumpage and things of that nature, and getting that log into the mill before it's even touched in terms of debark and whatever it produces is the biggest roadblock that the industry faces in BC today.
We'll get into a little bit about the challenges and what we're doing and talking about. But in your time, Phil, like you said, 20 years or whatever, was it as cyclical? Did you have lots of layoffs, or is that more of a recent thing up in your neck of the woods?
It's,
so to speak,
we have some mills in our local that seem to be down like 50% of the time, right? Mm-hmm. Just because they have trouble with getting logs in. But for the most part, our plywood plants have always done really well. We don't have a lot of layoffs. We are seeing some layoffs now that we have never seen before. And like Jeff said, like it's a lot with the logs, and they do try to be creative with it. They start bringing in smaller size logs to try to get peelers out of it. And, with the fires, we were bringing in burnt logs, which also causes, issues in the plant, but they're doing everything they can to not lay us off. But, it's tough times.
Yeah. And I know it has been very, disproportionate, I guess, across geographically, like a lot of the closures in the last couple of years have been particularly in the north, it seems like, anyway. Prior to that, there was quite a few on the coast. There hasn't been as much impact, I don't think. And Jeff, you can correct me if I'm wrong, as you spread east across the country, although there's some challenges, I think, in Quebec these days and a little bit in Ontario. But is that, because of product? Is that because of policies? Is a mix of a lot of stuff? Like, is it?
I think it's the biggest mix is fiber supply in BC relative to what the fiber supply is, what it is in northern Alberta, northern Alberta, Saskatchewan, and in northern Ontario and Quebec. Whereas if you flip the script a little bit, back in the early 2000s, the northern Ontario group were facing a lot of closures, a lot of layoffs. Their fiber supply had dwindled, and the cost of doing business was tough, whereas BC hadn't faced that yet. And now, due to a number of factors, especially in British Columbia, in terms of the beetle kill, the fall down from the beetle kill, it's a bad analogy, but now that the cheap salvage fiber is completely finished, mills are having to pay a higher price for the fiber that is still there, and they have to go farther to bring that fiber to the mills. But you're right, we have lost. Listen, I was elected into this position in 2018, and since up to the end of 2024, where we just lost 2 more mills in the northern BC, in Fort St. John and in Vanderhoof, 2 CAN4 operations. We've lost or we've closed upwards of about 15 mills and about 3,000 members, and that's just in just over almost 7 years. And
they still reelected you. Eh?
I know. I don't know what it's not what that I'm doing, but anyways, it is the impact, especially in BC. We haven't seen it near as much at the coast. So in northern BC, the interior BC, but even the south has been impacted. They were in 2018 in Phil's local. We lost Vavenby, we lost Chasm, and so. But since then, it's kind of stabilized in the south. Whereas in the north, the fall down has been unbelievable. The impact on our membership and that local and those communities has been tremendous. Mm-hmm. And to your point, though, on the coast, we've had a couple, both one in the Lower Mainland, 1 or 2 in the Lower Mainland, and a couple in the island, but that was over a longer period of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Brian, the president in the Prince George local, said they had 13 CAN4 mills at one point, and are now there's only 1 CAN4 primary sawmill left in that local.
CAN4 bought my mill in 2011, just before I came out to work for the local. They bought them from the Tembec mills in southeastern BC, and at that time they owned 14 mills in British Columbia. As of right now, they own 4. One of them is in the north. The other 3 are in the southeastern BC.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a big impact. So I know we met with the Premier David Eby, and the new Minister of Forests, Ravi Parmar, in December. And I know some of the locals have been meeting with them and some of the officials from the government in over the last couple months since the new government was elected, and of course prior to that. But what were some of the messages that you guys had for the Premier and the Minister about moving forward in the BC forest sector in particular?
Well, one of the things that was brought up is, if a plant shuts down in a community, that those logs should try to stay in those communities. Like with the Vavenby and West Fraser Chasm, when they shut down, that was such a big employer in those communities. And, those logs could have, stayed in those communities and created jobs in those communities. So, it's a big message that those logs should be tied to those communities.
Yeah, we used to call that a pertency, which is I think is a real estate term. Actually, I think somebody late Jesse Apple instructed me about a pertency being a real estate term where you put clauses, attach clauses to like real estate agreements. But that's what we called that in the past, and it's been gone since the early 2000s when the BC Liberals changed the Forest Act and removed all the manufacturing requirements, amongst a host of other things that were in the BC Forest Act at the time. But one of them was a pertency in any manufacturing requirements. And certainly when you look at like Houston and the communities you talked about, Phil, and some of the communities where the mills have closed, the company hangs on to the cutting rights, whether they're cutting or not. They hang on to those rights, and there's no more manufacturing. And that's not good for the industry, but it's certainly not good for those communities. And those communities feel that the value should come back, at least some of the value of harvesting the forest in their part of our beautiful province should come back to those communities and support them. Jeff, what kind of stuff did you hear? Or I know you wrote the letter to the minister, so you probably got the big list. But and you talked to all the locals. But what are the things that primary things we've been looking for the government to do?
Well, again, and one of the hardest things to explain to the government is that such a good thing that they did do in terms of the passing of DRIPA in 2019, groundbreaking legislation, First Nations consent and
Declaration on Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, which is the translation of the UN Declaration to law in BC, which essentially says that the government's going to try to respect Indigenous and First Nations title and rights and do what the courts and everyone else says they should be doing in terms of free and prior informed
consent.
Free and prior informed consent.
Yep.
That's it. There you go.
got it.
Okay, sorry, Jeff.
And one of the unintended consequences, I truly believe, is the ability for the government just to issue permitting, because there now is an extra step and more processes to go in terms of obtaining that free and prior informed consent, and government relations, and it's not a bad thing. It is a good thing, and it's a right thing to do. However, I think, like I said, one of the unintended consequences is that the bureaucracy that approved these permits and helped get the fiber to the operations either didn't know how to deal with it, or had basically a down tools approach to it until they were told by government that they could start issuing permits, and it's had a major effect on the ability of the mills to get fiber, and fiber that is economic, and have our mills continue to run on a continual basis. And that's been one of the message from myself and from the locals has been the access to fiber, and you don't want to change or do a different direction in terms of involving First Nations, and many of them who are into the industry or partners in the industry all over the province. But ensure that the process is streamlined enough so that when we do get the free and prior informed consent, it is hard to say, when that process is finished, that we still have mills alive and still running to actually produce the economic prosperity to both the nations, the communities, and our members that those mills do produce. So that's the conundrum that we found ourselves in. So getting fiber to those mills has been the biggest message to government, and I think Premier Eby and Minister Parmar has heard that, and hopefully we'll see some change.
And it's not just permits to the big publicly traded companies. 20 years ago-ish, the way we determine stumpage in BC is supposed to be based on market prices, and to do that they took, like, I think it was 20%, Jeff, 20% of the fiber supply and gave it to something called BC Timber Sales. And over the last number of years, BC Timber Sales, who essentially is supposed to auction off rights to harvest timber in various parts of the province, just kind of like ground to a halt in quite a few areas. And so even where the big companies weren't, I'm not going to be an apologist for the big publicly traded companies, because they're the ones closing the mills and all that. But even where it wasn't their fiber supply, the timber sales weren't getting out there. And that, that means that there's, the contract loggers aren't working, and the mills that don't have full fiber supply of their own weren't able to get fiber, which is, created that many more challenges. I do think that, the government has been, listening, but, one of the challenges is that, when manufacturing operations close, they tend to close and not come back. Now you're in a situation where, everyone's, as you said, Jeff, the cut has gone down, and we're not even harvesting the annual allowable cut. And so everyone's scrambling for the available fiber, and, it's hard to argue, well, you need to bring that fiber back to the community for the mill that's already closed, right? And so, there does need to be some, pretty aggressive thinking, I think, from us and from others about how do we rebuild the primary industry, because everybody talks about value added. And so I just wanted to sort of throw out value added. We should get more value from okay, there's less fiber supply. Let's just get more value. Like, what's the challenges around that?
Yeah. One of our certs actually got a value added plant added in, and, it added years and years to the life of that mill. Like, you look down 10 years, where would that mill be? Now that they have that value added plant coming in, it probably added 20, 30 years to that life of that mill. And, it was through the government that they got all that funding, and it probably wouldn't have went in without it. So, it is a great thing. They just need those companies to apply and go through the steps, and,
Yeah,
bring it in.
we need companies that are committed to doing that, right? No, it seems like not all of the sawmill companies or the big publicly traded companies are committed to doing that. They kind of look at it as somebody else's problem. We'll make 2x4s until we decide we're not gonna, and that's the end of it, right? Like, I don't know, is that too simplistic?
Well, I don't know. You look at Canfor's record of the last short while, or the last 10 years, like I said, it certainly looks like that they want to exit BC.
Mm-hmm.
However, they haven't lost a stick of their own tenure.
Mm-hmm.
And listen, we're not advocating that the mills that are benefiting with the tenure are to lose that, but at the end of the day, there's got to be a responsibility of these big publicly traded companies to do something. And I don't always throw kudos to Tokol, to your operation, but they actually, the late John Horgan did, his vision was that to get more value out of the fiber, out of the bush, and he incentivized it, and that's what I've been trying to harp to government to continue upon that, because Tokol took advantage of it and said, okay, we'll produce this. It's laminated plywood. It's a value-added product, right? And so, provided jobs, the unionized jobs, and did all the right things. And that's the stuff that we should be promoting, or should be incentivizing companies to do, because we do need a strong primary sector to support a strong value-added sector.
Right. And we can do that in Canada, right? It's not beyond there's an example in your local, but I know you were talking about some point later last year, you went to Quebec, and they have like a full area where they're logging all the way through to some pretty high value products in a pretty remote community of Quebec, right?
Chibougamau.
Yeah. And
in Chibougamau, Quebec, which is 4 hours north of Saguenay, they do a fantastic job of. They have one standalone sawmill. It's local 8655, and in Chibougamau, and they have a standalone sawmill, but on the same property, they have a very big value-added center where they do the finger jointed lumber, 2x3s, 2x4s, things of that nature. But what the products that they produce out of it, but when they finger joint them all back together, and they can strip them, they glue them back together, make massive beams for big structures. They make eye joists for homes. They make flooring joists, ceilings, also roofs, walls, all sorts of things. And it was probably about a $200 million investment, but they're making money. They're also not subject to duties when they ship them across the border, right? Yeah. So they're not subject to it. So yet, but who knows what Mr. Trump is going to do? But at the end of the day, that's the avenue, or that's the really the gold standard. When we toured that mill last month, it was something else. We have a couple of examples. One of them that are our members in local 1-423 in Penticton, and with the Mercer group there, and one and also in the Kootenays. But that was something to see. Yeah.
No, for sure, that's kind of the direction we need to go. Before we kind of get to what's next for you folks, and what do you want to see for the future of the industry? I know we just concluded. I guess all the contracts in BC or more or less got concluded pretty recently, and I know there's bargaining all across the Wood Council, all the time. But just maybe a few comments about the contract.
So let's compare apples and oranges right now, because that's what it is. I mean, our folks over on local 1-1937 with Western Forest Products just negotiated and ratified a 6-year deal with that group, which is really, really long. We haven't agreement. We hadn't had one of those since the 2003, 2009 collective agreement in the interior, but that didn't happen at the coast at that time. But nonetheless, there was a reason that they did that, is that Western Forest Products is going to invest into those operations. Those are 1,000 direct manufacturing jobs, and they're going to invest in kilns and things that are going to make their products more profitable and things of that nature, and hopefully prolong the life of those mills and make sure that our members work there longer, all that good stuff. But they paid for it. They too. I mean, you're looking at 6% and 9% for trades in the first year, and the 6% for production, and all sorts of really good stuff that they've improved upon in that collective agreement. They incorporated the sick days into their collective agreement. So if that has ever changed into the government, that's their premiums, or
and coming off a long strike.
Yeah.
So
I think you hit the nail on the head. Comparing the two regions in 2019 into 2020, there was a 7.5 month strike, the longest strike in BC wood products history, and whereas in the interior, north and south, we haven't been, with the exception of a couple of rotating strikes in 2018, a day here, a day there. We haven't been on strike en masse in the interior since 1986. I was in grade 11. Mm-hmm. Like we have a majority of our members that doesn't know what it looks like to be on strike. Mm-hmm. And not that we want our members to be on strike, but there's a distinct difference between the attitude towards a strike, I believe, in the on the coastal, at least in 1937, towards our members in the interior. And then again, the interior members have now suffered closure after closure after closure, and layoff after layoff and after layoff. And then the desire to go on strike when we bring back a collective agreement that is certainly decent and is actually on average is the highest for the one we brought back in last year, and it was the highest on average wage package that we'd had in 30 odd plus years. So you'd think, but it's all relative, right? We're facing inflation, they're facing layoffs and closures. So comparing the two it's really apples and oranges now, but the coast has done well.
Yeah. And I mean, it was difficult times, I think, in the interior for the bargaining that took place last year. So, but, like you said, Jeff, and I get where you're at, Phil. You don't want to, there's probably some folks in your operations that don't think it was really the best deal that we could have got. But, there wasn't concessions, and, it hasn't been a great time for the interior industry. And, in some ways, as Jeff said, it's as good a contract as we've got in quite a while, which, is not an excuse. It just kind of is what it is, and the members voted how they voted, right? So.
Well, and it was 15 months after the expiry of the collective agreement too, right? So it was a long time, right? Long bargaining. It definitely wasn't easy bargaining. The times weren't in our favor. Not that they usually are when we are in bargaining, but yeah.
Yeah. So, we're going to wrap up, I think, here. So, my last, I guess, question that I got, or what do you kind of hope to see, start of a new year for the sector broadly, for, our members in the forest sector, for your members, Phil, in your local, like, what do you see, or what do you hope to see moving forward? And, what are we going to need to be working on in the next couple of years?
Phil, you want to take that first?
Sure. One thing that's big for, our local is organizing. There's still mills in our area that aren't organized. And, they're still going to have the same fate as us, right? Like, it's only a matter of time. Either the industry is going to shrink more. We want to go after them too. We're not giving up on them, and also organizing outside of the wood industry too. Mm-hmm. We're getting bigger and bigger in healthcare and stuff like that. So I think organizing is something really that we want to work on.
And for sure,
building.
Yeah, we had a bit of success actually. We have organized a couple actually wood products manufacturing facilities, and in the Fraser Valley here in BC. In Alberta, we organized one. We had a couple campaigns that I think are still simmering along at a couple sawmills, well-known companies like Weyerhaeuser and West Fraser, where there's some mills that are non-union. And I know, as you mentioned, Phil, in your neck of the woods, there's a few mills that have we've looked at over the years and could still organize. And when you think back to our Forest Worker Summit and working with the other unions, the more what we're doing in mining, the more we're able to organize and increase the density, regardless of whether the industry is contracting or expanding. The better density we have, the better ability we have to look after workers, look after our members, and make sure that the companies aren't running roughshod over us. So there's a compelling argument, regardless of how the industry is doing, up or down, for us to be organizing and increasing density and fighting for all workers in the forest sector, right? I mean, just because they don't have a union, you're right. They are facing the same companies and the same markets that we are, right? So, Jeff, what do you think?
In terms of immediate kind of goals and immediate ideals that I'd like to aspire to for our group, now the bargaining's kind of set aside for the next couple of years. It will certainly on the coast, and then probably another 2 years before 27 before we get back into the interior, and then the cycle begins in Alberta and Saskatchewan. I think that two things. From a coastal perspective, I think the issue of successorship of when the harvesting rights changes hands, we still have the companies still have the ability to go non-union on the coast, which just needs to be fixed, and that needs to be fixed within the labor code. And so that's high on the list for me. And then a positive story that we don't talk about enough, that I've been putting a lot of attention to, is our pension plan. Our pension plan, the IWA pension plan, is in the best shape and providing the best benefit it ever has in its history. And I think that's one of I hear lots of feedback from members, and I know it's mostly BC centric. There are for other pockets where they're members of the plan. However, we are looking again at improving benefits and a little bit of past service again. And so I know that some folks have certainly conveyed to me that should be the focus. It's the most expensive focus, but we're going to be able to do that. Where it exactly lands, we haven't got there yet, but probably by mid-year of this year here in 25, we'll have an idea of where that lands in terms of improving the past service benefit. And so that's really two of the three things. And then lastly, just as a wood council, we kind of touched on it a little bit. Our folks in District 5 in the Chibougamau region, there is the 3 operations there, the 2 locals, and bringing them on a full-time basis into the local, at least seeing what we do out west and in Northern Ontario, and trying to really integrate them into into the forest industry to expose them what the rest of their union does in terms of the issues that we face and the issues that they face. And they're pretty common issues, and they're sure a lot of fun people. That was a fun time. I went back there in December to District 5 and visited. It was a fun time.
I just like saying Chibougamau. I'm sure I'd like going there too, but I'm sorry that I missed that visit. Okay, well, we're going to wrap this up. The forest sector in BC and across Canada, it's a complicated sector. We represent a good chunk of USW members in the forest sector. We have a good, strong wood council with a number of locals, and you just heard Jeff's trying to expand and reach out to any of those wood council locals or to Jeff if you want to chat more about the forest sector, or I'd be happy to do it as well. It is something that we're focusing on, we're working on, and on a number of fronts, including forest policy, but also organizing and making sure that we continue to get good contracts and enforce those contracts and make sure that the industry is safe and that our members earn good wages and benefits and pensions. Yeah, congrats on the IWA forest industry pension getting some pretty good increases recently. So with that, I'm going to wrap up episode 16 of the Strongest Steel podcast. Please continue to spread the word. You can listen on all the podcast channels and watch us on YouTube. Let your friends know, let your family know, let all your coworkers and other steelworkers know that they can catch up on the other 15 episodes and listen to episode 16 and beyond as we move into the rest of 2025. Follow us on social media at USW District 3 on Facebook, X, and Instagram. And you can email us if you have any questions or suggestions for future podcasts at d3comms@usw.ca. And with that, it's the Strongest Steel podcast, episode 16. Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Jeff. And we'll talk to you soon.